Hey, so significantly expanding the scope of a game mid-development is usually thought of as a bad idea. And for good reason. It often contributes to feature creep, delays, and burnout. But I've decided to do it anyway, and I want to explain why. For those of you who don't know, for the past 2 years I've been working on this top-down adventure game with a focus on magic and high mobility combat. Think of it as a blend between Hyperlight Drifter and Wizard of Legend. We're holding a playtesting session on the Discord community soon, so if you're not in the Discord and want to participate, the link will be in the description. It's still quite a small community as well, so you can give direct feedback, pitch ideas for monsters and spells, and view progress on all aspects of the game. I also post updates in devlogs here, but as you can see with my very inconsistent uploads, there's not exactly a schedule to it. Alright, so everyone knows about the dangers of scope creep in game development. Especially for indie developers, it's really tempting to look at all the cool ideas from other games and want to implement them in your own game. When I was building out Pendant last year, I was really inspired by Hollow Knight and Hades, and I had all these goals for adding similar systems as found in those games, like charms that the player could collect around the map, and levels that were interconnected with areas locked behind traversal upgrades. I also added a blessing system where you could go up to different statues and talk with a deity or god, and you would be able to choose a buff to be blessed with. And the list goes on and on. I had plans for a crafting system, a dynamic trading system, and a quick travel system. But none of these things really meaningfully added to the game. And I realized that yes, implementing these systems were fairly easy initially. You just add some UI and basic logic. There's plenty of tutorials out there for inventory systems and stuff like that. But actually keeping up with maintaining these systems, and adding content, art, playtesting the mechanics, that was what was taking up way too much of my time from other things. And of course, these systems didn't even improve the core combat-oriented gameplay. If the combat and movement in a game isn't fun, no one really cares that they're able to craft a weapon with higher damage. There is, I think, however, a situation where scoping up in the middle of development and adding a bunch of new features is warranted, and actually a very good decision. Originally in my game, the story was the weakest link. I kind of treated making the plot and setting as afterthoughts compared to designing the actual gameplay mechanics and boss fights. I knew I wanted to have some fantasy story about going on a journey back to the capital of this empire, but that was really born out of the need to have the player travel through a variety of regions and fight distinct bosses, rather than any desire to tell a meaningful narrative. The story was secondary, it felt hollow, and you could strip it out, replace the setting with another fantasy world, and the game would pretty much stay the same. And of course, not all games need to have a compelling story, but I was already planning to have voice actors, dialogue trees, and companion fighting and traveling mechanics, which are all things that depend on having a solid story and world for the player to care about. So I knew I had to redo the story, and specifically I knew I needed a story and a world that would feel much more uniquely attached to the core gameplay. One of the biggest opportunities to accomplish this was through overhauling the magic system, which is both something that can have lore built out around it and directly impacts the combat game mechanics. I was exploring a bunch of different magic system ideas, and eventually landed on a system where you need to trade memories in exchange for magical power. And I thought that was a really cool system. It relied on sacrifice and meant that mages needed to grapple with a very personal decision every time they wanted to cast. I was so passionate about this idea that I stayed up one night to really develop and go deep into the magic system and its influences. I kept brainstorming how it would affect the power dynamics in the world, what stories I wanted to tell that had a centric focus on memory, and how it would affect the characters as they burned very important memories of their past. By the next day, my scope for the game was massively increased. And the story, which used to be secondary to the game mechanics, was now the source of the new mechanics I wanted to add. I settled on an idea where you'll have a set of core memories that you start the game with, which kind of represent the most emotionally powerful memories, or the memories that you will always remember. And as the game progresses, you'll have opportunities to sacrifice those core memories in exchange for massive boosts in your magical capability. However, the more memories you sacrifice, the more unstable your character becomes, and the more you start to lose your sense of self. This will be represented as a set of negative side effects for the player, such as not being able to talk to certain people, being more susceptible to enemy magic, and risk having your own magic become uncontrollable. That in turn will affect your motivations and how the story progresses. And now things felt a lot more connected. The magic system is no longer this thing that we're just adding to the combat to make fighting more interesting. It's the beating heart of the world and what drives the story forward. Sacrificing memories for magic has both gameplay and plot consequences, so the mechanics, story, and world building are no longer operating in isolation. Instead, they're feeding into each other. And speaking of memory, that also ties into the name of the game as well. Previously named Pendant, the game is now called Sovenance, which is an outdated English word for memory. So bringing this back to the original question of when it's a good idea to expand your scope, this was a situation where it was really clear that something was missing, and the solution I decided on was to overhaul the magic system. I expanded the scope from that singular point, and every mechanic I added had the goal of connecting the other aspects of the game together. So while we all can probably agree that adding features to just increase the number of things for the player to do, or just because they're in other games, is usually a poor decision, I think adding features with the goal of creating a central thematic purpose can really increase the cohesion of your game and give it a really cool identity. It's also important to mention that I don't have a hard deadline to release this game or any financial objectives that I 100% need to hit. This is an indie project and I'm the only developer, so I have a lot more flexibility with things compared to like an actual studio. That said, I still have obligations with making sure I can pay artists, voice actors, and other people helping make assets for the game. And I still set periodic deadlines for myself to make sure I can get this game out within a reasonable time frame. Okay, so that was the recap about the overall direction that this game is going in. But now I want to discuss more about the specifics of what we've all been working on for the past 10 months or so, since the previous devlog came out. First and foremost, we overhauled and redid the art for the player character. The previous sprites I was working with, I made pretty much at the start of the game's development, and they really weren't holding up anymore compared to the other character art and environment art. I finally decided to get an experienced pixel artist on the team to help me redo all the player animations, and I think it turned out quite well. Hyperlight Drifter, as I said before, was a big inspiration for us, and you can definitely see that in the player character. This likely isn't going to be the final sprite of the character, but whatever changes we make will be building off of this. We also have new sprites and animations for the companion character, Professor Bloomquist. This character acts as a kind of mentor to Pella and will appear in multiple fight scenes to fight alongside the player. Beyond that, we've added a variety of enemy characters, 3 different types of bandits with varying attacks, several more creature enemies like this giant poison wasp, this cave troll, and this very alien-looking creature with a jumping attack. The goal for designing these enemies is to have each of them be unique enough so that the player will have to adapt their fighting style on both an individual and group basis. And this is still a problem that I'm trying to figure out, so if you have any suggestions for attacks or entirely new monsters, feel free to message me on Discord. We also have a new boss fight with this bandit leader I implemented last week, bringing the total number of boss fights to 3, which is pretty exciting. Besides the new character art, we also have new environment art. Originally, the game was supposed to start in this forest scene at nighttime, where Pella is running from a group of evil mages, but in line with the story changes, I've decided to switch that scene with a series of scenes on a coastline at sunset. We made 4 different art pieces for the introduction that you can see here. Each one is hand-pixeled over a very large canvas with many layers for us to order objects in the camera. The reason why we didn't go for tile maps for this is because I wanted to capture a more natural and loose background, which wouldn't conform exactly to set tiles. We did use tile maps for the second level though. This underground area uses tiles from this itch.io page called Epic RPG World Crypt. I'll put the link in the description if you want to check it out. Previously, what I had for the underground level was very plain and muted, so this asset pack really helped it give it more character. It still has some discrepancies with our style that we're going to have to reconcile later on, like it's a bit too refined and detailed for what we're going for, but it works for the demo. We also have this incredible underground forest work that is currently in the process of being implemented. The goal was to go for a very flowy and natural feel for this piece to contrast the rigid tile maps that the rest of the underground level has. Now that most of the artwork has been discussed, we can talk more about the mechanical side of changes. It's probably the biggest changes have been implementing a variety of quality of life and backend systems. We now have a more robust save system, controller support, control rebindings, control icons that switch depending on your device, a Cinemachine-based camera system, and an Fmod audio system that plays music, sound effects, and voice lines. There still needs to be a lot of work done to polish these systems, but the main parts are pretty much finished. Besides that, I implemented a bunch of smaller mechanics. We now have a parry system where enemies that have melee attacks can be countered if you swing your sword within the correct time window. We have a new upgrade tree with upgrades for your sword, bow, magic missile, and mana. I don't want to go too deep into the mechanics since I'm probably going to reserve a devlog or 2 in the future that goes much more in depth. But yeah, now I want to discuss more about the story and all the other creative elements that accompany it. So recently I've been scoping out the plot and script for this introduction level, since it's going to be featured on the Discord playtesting demo. And I was able to get in touch with some voice actors who agreed to voice the 5 or so characters present in the demo. I pretty much don't have any experience with creative writing or screenwriting, So it was really tough getting a script that sounded decent and simultaneously worked within the game. I went through 3 drafts in total. The current one I got voice acted, and in my opinion, it turned out pretty good. I'll play you a couple voices to get an idea.
They'll be at each other's throats soon enough. I'm good. The captain.
Your blade. I'll be right behind you. My acolyte, who understands our place in the chain of command as much as you, I'm sure.
With respect to the sound side of things, it's been going great with music. We're going for an atmospheric orchestral vibe overall, pulling inspiration from games like Hollow Knight, Ori and the Will of the Wisps, Journey, and Grease, with some deviations to other styles in certain scenes. The composer is Ruben from Skyline Productions, and here's some short snippets of his work. We also have some custom new sound effects created by sound designer and DJ Jordan Suckley. Finally, there's been a lot more polishing done for the game. Bug fixes, new illustrations, updating the website, adding game feel, and generally making it a lot more presentable. And yeah, that was my pretty brief summary of what we've been up to since the last devlog. I'll try to post these more often since they're a good way to provide updates without having to write just a huge wall of text. And again, we're planning to have a playtesting session on the Discord fairly soon, so if you want to try out the game, give feedback, or just observe, feel free to join the Discord server in the description of this video. And it's also good motivation for me knowing that there's people out there interested in this game. Alright, until next time, thanks for watching.